Okay, so let's dig in and start, getting into the details of what utilitarianism is. I sort of used that quiz to introduce it. I said a few things about it last time, but I didn't really get into the details. Utilitarianism is a kind of consequentialism. Consequentialism is a sort of family of moral theories. Um, you know, we are not going to talk about any of them except utilitarianism because utilitarianism is by far the most important kind. But just keep in mind there are other consequentialist theories out there. And to talk about consequentialism just means you evaluate the morality of an action, either what other people do or more importantly, what you are considering doing in terms of consequences. You know, when we took that quiz, if you answered the questions in a pretty common way, you were thinking of consequences, right? Better consequences to fire the thrusters, better consequences to give away the ticket, better consequences to give the ventilator to a 20-year-old than a 70-year-old. So, thinking like consequentialists. But you have to give some more detail about what are good and bad consequences. You tell me the right action is whatever has the best consequences. And sometimes it's pretty clear we don't need to think very much about our theory. You know, if we can prevent anybody from dying on the one hand and on the other, 5 people die, obviously nobody dying is better consequences than 5 people dying. But other cases are not going to be so clear. So, we need an account of what are good and bad consequences, which utilitarianism gives us. Utilitarianism focuses on happiness. Now, you want to be careful because you have to think about how we define a word, right? And happiness is one of those words we probably think we know what we mean by it, but it's kind of slippery. It can mean a lot of things. But the utilitarians give us a very definite definition of happiness. The utilitarian says happiness is pleasure and the absence of pain. Happiness is almost, in fact, it is something for a utilitarian you can ascribe, you can pop on a number to, right? Pleasure is the black number, the number with the plus in front of it. Pain is the red number, the number with a minus in front of it. You want as much pleasure and as little pain as possible. That is happiness. And you want to create as much of it as you can. And if you're a utilitarian, you want to be clear. Pleasure is, yes, physically pleasurable sensations, but it's also mental sensations, Food, sex, laying in the sun, you know, laying in a warm bath, you know, sleeping in on some morning. Those are all physically pleasurable sensations and they count as such for utilitarians. But they will also count mental things. If you like doing Sudoku puzzles and you're sitting there doing Sudoku puzzles, that's pleasure. If you like watching some TV show, that's pleasure. If you are, one of my students said she liked doing her accounting homework, well, that's pleasure for her. Lucky for her, that's, actually get paid pretty well for that. Most people aren't so lucky, but that is pleasure for her, right? And on the other hand, the utilitarian is equally permissive, equally, they're going to allow as much for pain, right? Pain is any sensation you dislike. If your head is hurting, yes, that's pain. If you stub your little pinky toe in the dark, which I do a lot, that's pain, right? When you have kids, you do these kind of things. It's like you wake up in the middle of the night and the kid's crying, you run, try to get up there, whack, right? If you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, and you're planning on having them, well, you will. But pain is other sensations. It doesn't have to be physical, right? If you are sitting somewhere bored out of your mind, that's pain. If you are sitting in traffic, frustrated, You want to get somewhere and you can't go anywhere, and some idiot's behind you blowing the horn. You know, happens to me fairly often. Thinking of a guy this morning who was an inch off my bumper blowing his horn because somehow he thought I could magically undo the traffic jam, I suppose. Right? That is pain, right? Me sitting there being frustrated with the traffic jam and mad at this idiot behind me who basically looked like a tall version of Gollum from Lord of the Rings, an inch off my bumper, blowing his horn. That's also pain for the utilitarian. Anyway, so pleasure, anything you like, pain, any sensation that people dislike. And the utilitarian will say the right action is the one that creates the greatest overall happiness. Overall happiness means the most pleasure and the least pain for everyone involved. Utilitarianism, one thing you want to be clear on, and if I see you say that utilitarianism says the right action is the one that makes the most people happy, I will know you didn't watch this lecture, that you are not paying attention to me, and I will grade accordingly, because it is a very common mistake about utilitarianism, but it is a mistake and it's important not to make it. Utilitarianism doesn't say to do whatever makes the most people happy, because intensity matters too. Think about it this way. Think about our example from the quiz I gave you guys. Duran Duran tickets. Jane is a little less happy if she gives the tickets away. Liz is way happier. It seems that the numbers don't tell us anything here, right? One person a little less happy, one person way happier, or on the other side, one person a little happier, the other one doesn't get the happiness they might otherwise get, right? But intensity matters here, even though the numbers are the same. It's not just that Liz is going to be happy versus Jane being happy. It's like Liz is going to be way happier than Jane would be, right? And the loss to Jane is pretty small. Or you can think of this, other examples. I have a friend who is deathly allergic to peanuts, went to graduate school with him. And, when we would go eat at a restaurant, this would put a lot of options off the table. And imagine there's like 4 of us. 3 of us want to go to a Thai place. You guys know Thai food is just full of peanuts. I love Thai food. I'm luckily not allergic to peanuts. But, the 3 of us might be a little happier to go to a Thai place, but Brian would be way less happy, right? My friend who has the peanut allergy. Either he couldn't come, or if he came, he would have to sit there and watch us all eat while he couldn't even touch a water glass. We would be a little less happy, but he is way happier, right? So the action that makes the most people happy might be going to the Thai restaurant. That wouldn't be what the utilitarian says, because intensity matters as well. And this is often really important, because a lot of times you'll have an action that maybe annoys a lot of people a very small amount, but makes somebody incredibly happy. Well, because intensity is important, that might carry the day. So, generally speaking, very often, the action that makes the most people happy will be what the utilitarian will recommend. Usually they will say to do that, but that is not what utilitarianism says. That's not their basic guideline. So be very clear on that. All right, so coming up with and testing a moral theory. I've talked a little bit about this so far. Just want to say a little bit about it before we end this first lecture on utilitarianism. This is the kind of thing you saw Socrates doing. Like I said, I feel like the Republic, Book 1, or really almost any Platonic dialogue is a pretty good introduction to what it is philosophers do. So how do we come up with and test a moral theory? Well, first we come up with a theory that explains some moral judgments we're really sure about. Stuff like it's generally wrong to kill or it's generally wrong to steal, things like that. Then you search for possible counterexamples, the kind of thing that Socrates gave Polemarchus a hard time about. Try to find a case where the theory gives a crazy answer. If it does, well, we'll try to deal with that. If it doesn't, so much the better for the theory. Just to clue you guys in, lay my cards down a little bit. Unfortunately, every theory runs into some counterexamples. Those are going to be problems. Finally, apply the theory to cases we are not sure about. Right? And there's two reasons why 3 is important. One, what's the point of doing a moral theory? What's the point of coming up with one if it doesn't give us any guidance in cases we aren't sure about? But also, if the theory can't tell us anything about unfamiliar cases, you might worry that it's not really saying anything after all, right? All right. Last point I want to make before I end this lecture is that utilitarianism does quite well with many ordinary moral judgments. Think about killing, right? If you were a utilitarian, why would it be wrong in almost all circumstances, the vast majority of circumstances, to kill another human being? Well, 2 reasons, right? One, this person has family, they have friends, these people are going to be sad, distraught, angry, just all kinds of mental anguish they will suffer if their friend or loved one is killed. You have the general public who will probably be afraid and outraged too, a little less so. Kind of the same thing, right? The effects it has on other people are overwhelmingly negative. And 2, you deprive the person of all future happiness they might have. If you kill somebody, even if you do it in a way that's painless for that person, all the future pleasure they would have from life is just going to be gone because they're no longer alive. That's a huge cost. Killing another human being almost never does anything but create unhappiness, right? On balance. Or think about stealing, right? If someone steals something, that might make them very happy that they have this thing they wanted. Obviously, they didn't think it would make them somewhat happier, they wouldn't steal it. But think about the effects on others, right? I remember, years ago, this wasn't around here, this is when I first moved to Knoxville, where I used to live. I hadn't been living in a big city. I moved to Knoxville. I live I forget, I think it was like a GPS unit, might have been some coins in my car. Somebody smashes my window and grabs it, right? Well, they might be happy because they can maybe sell this GPS unit for some amount of money. $5, $10, I don't know what a pawned GPS unit will get you. But think about what it does to my happiness. In fact, this ruined my morning, right? I go out, my window's smashed. I'm really unhappy. I look at the sky. It looks like it's going to rain. I spent all morning waiting for the glass guy to come, praying it won't rain. And I have to pay for the glass for my car, which was a lot more than whatever I'm sure this guy got for the GPS unit. People in my apartment building see me out on the street with my window smashed. I parked off to the side where there wasn't a lot of light. After this happened, everybody fought every night for the spaces under the lamps out front. So you can see how stealing usually creates much more unhappiness than happiness, and so is wrong for a utilitarian. Now, one other thing to notice, and this is, I think, a strength of utilitarianism, is there are exceptions to these things, right? If someone's running at me with an axe and is going to hack me to bits, and I have some way of killing them, I don't know if I have a gun on me or whatever, use your imagination. But if someone is going to kill me unless I kill them, if that is really the case, most of us would think that killing is okay in that case, right? Well, why? Utilitarianism can give a good answer, right? If somebody is going to axe murder you, then no matter what you do, one person's going to end up dead. All right, so that's a wash consequences wise. But if we had to pick a person to be dead, would it be average man on the street? Hopefully everyone listening to these lectures, fits this category, or axe murderer, right? Future consequences, it's way better if the average person survives than if the axe murderer does, because he's going to go out and probably do more axe murdering, right? Or think of another case, right? We think it's usually wrong to steal or to damage, break into somebody else's property. But imagine you are lost in the woods. It's getting cold. You don't know how to get out. And you just wander across a cabin. There's nobody there. But you could break in, spend the night, avoid maybe freezing to death. There's food. You're hungry. You could take that. There might even be maps or like a phone or something you could use. Should you break into the cabin or not? Most of us would say it's perfectly fine, and in fact, you should, right? It is usually wrong to break into somebody else's house. It is usually wrong to steal. But in this case, most of us would think not, and the utilitarian gives us a good answer as to why, right? If you save your life, or even just avoid permanent injury, like with something like frostbite, well, that's going to have a much bigger payout in happiness than the cost of like damaging someone's property, sleeping in their bed, or taking a few cans of beans or something, right? Most people would, in the circumstances, assuming you paid them back, wouldn't even, really much mind that you did this with their cabin, right? But even if there's some horrible stingy figure who's mad forever that somebody broke into their cabin, you saving your life or preventing, debilitating injuries even with frostbite, that's going to outweigh this person's unhappiness. So, utilitarianism seems to do well with this, explains the judgments we make in all these cases. And you can think of a lot more cases, that utilitarianism gives us a pretty plausible, pretty intuitive answer. All right. So we'll wrap up there for this lecture. In the next one, we'll go into a bit more of the details for utilitarianism. One thing you guys are going to notice about utilitarianism is it seems like a very simple theory, and the basic idea behind it is very simple. It turns out to be deceptively complex to apply, though. And that's one of the things I'm going to start getting into in the next lecture.